Hello and welcome back. In this section we're going to continue looking at relationships, but this time we're going to look at ways of presenting relationships based on the techniques that you've learned, but being a little bit more inventive. We're going to start with the information about insurance policy sales again, but I've got a simplified version of the data, and all I have for the 2-year period that we had data for is by month, Jan, Feb, Mar, the number of inquiries and the number of policies. And we're going to put together a simple graphical representation of this relationship. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to make all of the inquiries figures negative. Now the easiest way to do that is to create a formula. So I'm going to put a formula in here of equals minus B2, which puts a value of minus 241 in there. Select and fill down with the shortcut Control D. Copy those values and then do a paste special, which is effectively a paste values into there to make those numbers negative, and then I can get rid of the column that I used. So what I've now got is a negative number for each of the inquiries. Now I'm now going to give you some idea of what we're trying to achieve with this particular exercise. If I select all of the data now and do insert bar and then do a stacked bar, the chart that I get, I'll just make it a bit bigger for you, the chart that I get effectively shows the inquiries pointing that way, the policies pointing that way, and apart from the fact I've got these negative numbers, it's a representation showing for each month of the year the relative numbers of inquiries and policies. And it's quite a good representation. It shows that in May we're pretty busy on both fronts, and that particularly in December we're busy, although we get more inquiries in December for not quite so many policies. So the balance of business in May is maybe not so good. More policies for the number of inquiries. So it's only really these negative numbers that create us a problem. So let's look at how we can deal with that. An important thing to realize in Excel when you're formatting cells is that no matter how you format the cells, you won't actually be changing the underlying values in the cells. So if I take these negative numbers here under the inquiries, go into format cells, and instead of using conventional format for number, go into custom and use a custom format of 0 semicolon 0, that will actually present the numeric values but without any leading negative sign, any minus sign. Click on OK, and my values, the underlying values are still negative, but they appear as positive, and in fact the chart gets updated accordingly as well. The scale pointing out from 0 on the left now shows positive numbers because the chart is based on the numbers as they are seen here rather than the underlying values. Let's do a little work now on the chart itself. Go into the Design tab, look for Chart Layouts. Let's go for a chart with a title and legend at the top and axes. Yeah, I think that one will probably do the job. Chart title there, and I've got the legend at the bottom, and I still show my numbers down here. Chart titles is inquiries and policies by month. Okay. So I'm very nearly happy with this, but there are still a couple of problems with it. One of them is that the horizontal scale to the left of the 0 is much longer than the one to the right on the 0. Excel 2010 has automatically decided on minimum and maximum points for both of these. So I noticed that the largest figure under inquiries is 402, so I need to go out to 500, but I need the right to go out to 500 as well. So if I go into axes, click on primary horizontal axis, go into options and change the maximum to 500 fixed and the minimum to -500 fixed. Close that. That gives me a much better representation of the relative sizes. And the other thing that I might find a little bit annoying is the fact that the months are in the bars and actually they're visible, but the colouring means that they're not quite as visible as I'd like them to be. So let's fix that as well. This particular problem is also solved using the Layout tab Axes button, and then we go to primary vertical axis, go down to the options, and within the options you can see that the axis labels are next to the axis. I have an option of setting them at the low values, which for this is obviously -500. And there you can see the month numbers are now over here. Just click outside, and the vertical grid lines are a good way of reading off the numbers. I can put in an axis title here if I want to. I think it's unnecessary to point out that they're months. And there we are. That's a pretty good visual representation of the relationship between inquiries and policies by month. For the rest of this section, we're going to look at one or two other examples of charts that can help with the purpose of showing relationships. And the one we're going to look at next is the bubble chart. Now the bubble chart is one which is sometimes misused. It's important to understand situations in which a bubble chart can be used. And the basic situation in which a bubble chart is used is where you have three values of three variables, and because you're drawing a two-dimensional chart, in order to show the relative values, the relationships for the three variables, the third variable becomes the size of the point in the chart. It's also important to recognize that none of these variables are actually categories. They are all values. Now I've got some data here relating to demographics in 5 African countries. For the 5 countries I've got the unemployment rate in percent, the population in millions, and the GDP per person in US dollars. Now generally speaking, to draw a bubble chart you need to select the data without any of the headings, and then we add the headings, chart titles and so on afterwards. So having selected the data, the next step is to do Insert, Other Charts in the Charts group, and Bubble. Now there are two sorts of bubble chart. There's the bubble chart itself, and then there's a bubble with a 3D effect. Let's go for the one with the 3D effect. And we get this rather smart looking chart with two axes and bubbles. Now the first axis, the x-axis, always corresponds to the first column of data or the first range of data that we've chosen. Now in this case that's the unemployment rate along here. The y-axis will be the second column, which is the population in millions, and the third column, the GDP per person, is used to determine the size of the bubbles. Now a simple analysis of this bubble chart would say that the highest GDP per person corresponds to countries with the highest unemployment rate but the lower populations. Now obviously that's not universally true, because this one here is an exception. This is actually Morocco. But as a general rule we get the larger size bubbles here where the unemployment rate is higher and the population is lower. This largest one here is actually South Africa. So let's make that chart a little bit bigger, and then let's start to format it. Now for formatting, we can select a chart layout on the Design tab. So we'll go for Layout 1, which gives us a title, both axes labelled, and a legend over here. So I'm now going to put in a chart title of GDP per person based on unemployment rate and population size. Quite a big title there. Then down here I'm going to put population, millions, and here unemployment percent. Okay. So I'm just going to delete the legend because it's not really going to help us. We've got the nature of the information in the title, GDP per person. One other thing to point out here, if you look at the size of the bubbles, if you go into Format Data Series, there is an entry in there about what the size represents, area of bubbles or width of bubbles. Now, generally speaking, you should always choose area of bubbles because the relative values for this third variable, in this case the GDP, will, if you do them as width of bubbles, basically be squared compared with the actual relationship. So for instance, if you had one country's GDP twice as much as another's, if you base the width of the bubbles on that, you'd finish up with a bubble that was actually 4 times as big instead of twice as big. So you should always base it on area. And the other thing is, if you find that the bubbles are either too big or too small to make the point, you can scale them. So I could say set that at 50, and then all the bubbles come out smaller. Now, generally speaking, you wouldn't use a bubble chart with more than maybe half a dozen values anyway. So overlapping shouldn't be a big problem, but you might need to use that in some situations. So finally, let me go back to the Design tab and look at the available gallery of styles. If I say choose this one, and I finish up with a pretty good looking chart showing GDP per person based on unemployment rate and population size for 5 countries. Now of course I could put labels on to show the 5 countries and so on, but as you can see it's quite an impressive sort of presentation. Now the last type of relationship chart I'm going to show you is a radar chart, and the example I've got here is a pretty straightforward one. The radar chart is generally used where we are comparing a set of values with either another set of values or often with some sort of target or benchmark set of values. Now here I've got a situation where a student has a set of target grades on a scale of 1 to 5 that the student's been set, and the scores in the latest tests are over here. So their target grade on mathematics was 4, the latest score is 5. Now if I select all of the data, so that's the list of subjects, the target grades and the scores, click on Insert, click on Other Charts, and then Radar, I get this rather interesting radar chart. Now what the radar chart shows is the categories are around the outside. So you can see all the subjects, general studies, modern languages, English language and so on. And then as shown by the legend, the target grade in each case is the blue line and the other line shows the actual score. So we can basically say where the student has gone outside the blue line, they're performing well because they've exceeded the target score, and when it goes inside the blue line, such as in history and social studies, they haven't matched their target score. So that's a radar chart. So we've now seen most of the types of chart. There's still a few to go, but the main ones we've looked at. And in the next section we're going to start to look at specific applications in relation to the stock market. I'll see you then.